guys, it's Faye, and for today's video I decided to answer one of the questions that I got on my brand new Facebook page, which I'm still sort of learning how to use, you guys, so I'm really sorry if I'm not answering all y'all's messages and comments and stuff like that. The whole notification thing is a little new to me, but this morning I did happen to see a notification and a question, and I decided to answer it not only on Facebook but also as a video, because I feel like this is such an important question, something I talk to my customers about all the time, and I figure for every one person who asks, there's probably a bunch of people who are thinking the same thing but don't ask. So here goes. I wrote it down on my notebook because I am so technologically advanced and I'm using my phone as my camera to record this, so can't do both at the same time. Stop judging. So Terry asks this morning, I have a question. I have a 2005 Nissan Sentra with CV boot issues. Oh my goodness. Is it best to buy a whole kit or just the boots to replace? Now this is an awesome question, because for those of you who are DIYers or who like to save a little bit of money by purchasing your own parts, it can look really attractive sometimes to just replace the boots, right? Because you can see the whole CV joint assembly can be from like, I don't know, anywhere from like $75 to $800 or more. And then you see the CV boot itself, or like a little boot kit, is like $12 or $20. So you're like, oh my gosh, I can save like $50 or maybe like $200 by replacing just the boots. So great question, Terry. I'm going to cover now why just replacing the boots might not be the best idea for everybody, especially if you're going to have this replaced by a technician. So first of all, let me back up. What the heck is a CV boot? Because I have a ripped boot right here, and I'm not going to replace it. I'm just going to keep on wearing this boot until it wears itself completely out, because I love this boot so much. Actually, that might be a really good analogy for this CV boot. But first, this boot and this boot are a little different in a number of ways, but they're also similar in a lot of ways. Just like my real boots, well, I mean, these are both real boots. Just like my boot boots keep like dirt and dust and debris and sharp things and water, moisture away from my feet, our CV boot is protecting our CV joint, our constant velocity joint. Oh, by the way, this entire assembly is also referred to as the axle. So you've probably heard of this as the axle more commonly. Let's see, my hands and grease, and I'm just have to embrace the fact that's gonna happen. So this guy goes on top of here, and this is a good example. Oh my God, just go on there. I swear I think this goes together. I just pulled him out of the trash. Come on. Okay, there we go. All right, so here we go. This is probably what Terry's CV boot issues are gonna look like. So we have this protective cover going over that CV joint, keeping dust and debris and water from getting onto it, getting into and embedding itself into the grease and causing damage to these moving metal parts. Now, these moving metal parts are actually super important, because what this does is it connects the transmission side. It connects the transmission to the wheel. This transmits that spinning force from our transmission, our drivetrain, like to our wheels. So when we say constant velocity joint, we mean it. So if this thing is spinning super fast and we have CV boot issues, then what's gonna happen is that with just that momentum, all the grease inside of here that's protecting and lubricating this like super essential joint is like, and all these little bearings is just gonna shoot all over the place. And that just gives this big dramatic look of like, you know, clearly something's gone wrong when we see this giant mess underneath our vehicles. So why is it a good idea to replace the entire thing as opposed to just the boot? Well, first of all, cost. You may think right away that like, oh my gosh, you know, $20 for this, you know, maybe it's both boots on an axle, is super cheap. Well, what you're forgetting about is that the technician also has to do all of the work to remove this axle, which is, I mean, depending on the vehicle, it can be 1 or 2 or even 3 hours of labor. Then, in order to remove the CV boot, in order to put on another one, she has to then cut off the old bearing, the old boot, remove this bearing super carefully, put the new boot on, and then replace the bearing. And if the boot has been torn for a while and like dirt and debris and grease is getting in, I'm sure that she's gonna do her best to like remove all the old grease and try to like get all the dirt out before putting new grease on. But there's still probably gonna be some sort of junk left over in there. And here, take a look. If I pull back this part, you can kind of see in there like all the little, maybe you can't, there's too much grease on that one. You can see all these little teeny tiny little needle bearings inside there. I don't know if you can or not, but there's all these teeny little roller bearings. They're so cute. But there's a lot of space inside of there for like dirt that's gotten in there to stay and hang out and cause like further damage to the bearing. So depending on how much the boot or the axle costs, it just makes so much more sense to get a brand new axle out of the deal with 2 brand new boots and CV bearings, joints rather, for your money, especially if this axle only costs, you know, like $75 or $150 or, you know, something like that. Yeah, because then you're paying all this money and, you know, we don't know what the condition of the joint is. But now, Terry, that does not mean that because your boot is torn, you need to run right out there and get a brand new axle. Most of the time, when I see torn boots, there's no problem with the axle at all. I mean, because don't forget, like the boot doesn't determine whether or not this thing functions. The boot's just there to like protect this thing. So the only reason to replace the axle is once the axle actually starts to go bad. Like, is there play in this, in the bearing? Is there a terrible clicking noise being made when you're turning? You know, has this started to go bad? That's really the only time when you need to actually replace it. I mean, if you have a lot of extra money laying around and you just want to replace it prematurely so that you won't have to worry about it once the boot has torn, that is fine too. Absolutely no judgment. Now, there are, of course, a couple occasions where I have replaced just the boots, but that has been in a like extreme case. And I'll give you an example of an extreme case. So, let's see, what is an extreme case? Oh, I know. I had this customer once with this super sweet, like older 4-wheel drive rig. It was like carbureted and it was all like lifted and modified and it was pretty sweet. And he was about to take it on a safari, like a legit like safari cruise. I don't know. So he brought it to me at my shop in Portland, Oregon to take a look at it and sort of assess its ability to be out in the country for a while and be a safe running a vehicle for him for a while. And the first thing that I noticed was all 4 of his CV boots were torn, but his axles did not have any play. They were still in good shape. So I asked him, I was like, are you going to be like going through some water on this safari? Like, are you going to be going across the desert? Like, basically I was assessing what the likelihood was that a bunch of junk could like get in here. Well, imagine it like back together. Here, I'm gonna go struggle again, try to put it back together. Come on, just go. It's like when it's together, oh my God. Okay, there we go. Okay, so when it's together, it's not like I had it before. Actually, because he had it lifted, it was a little bit more exposed, but on Terry's Ultima, or Sentra rather, it's just gonna be like looking like this. I mean, so there's gonna be like a little bit of exposure, but not a ton. So on his, it was like a little bit more exposed like this due to the lift kit on the vehicle. So I was imagining, what happens if he goes through some water or he goes into the desert and a bunch of dirt and debris gets up in there. Well, I mean, that could cause some trouble. That could cause damage to the bearing, damage to the axle. Stuff could get caught in there. And just because it was four-wheel drive and it was very difficult to get these axles out, I recommended that we do something about the boot problem before he went on the safari. Now, I looked up the prices of 2 brand new axles, and they were actually over $800 each. So, in this one particular case, I said, hey, let's just replace the boots. Like I was saying before, I took a very long time cleaning out all of the grease, all the old grease, making sure that they were as clean as possible so that, when I replaced the boots and put the brand new grease in there, it was as close as possible to a brand new axle. And in that case, it cost him less than half of the amount of just replacing an axle to do both sides and stuff like that. And that's not something where like if you're in the middle of like a safari that's like taking you months, like it doesn't make any sense to like buy the axles and have them on hand and try to replace them in the, you know what I mean? Like that's an extreme case. So for you, Terry, I would just say next time that you go and have your oil changed, or the next time you have your mobile mechanic assess your vehicle, just have that technician take a look and see, well, more than just a look, actually take a feel, see if there is any play in that axle, if there's any damage to the axle. And if there's no damage to the axle, if the axle is in good shape, then there's no need to replace it just yet. Then just monitor it and just, keep sort of an idea in the back of your head, just like you do with your oil change. Well, at some point, I'll need to replace it. But who knows? Driving around on safe, clean Texas roads, it may be fine for years before you have to replace it due to actual damage. Now, there are 2 other circumstances where I may recommend replacing the axle prematurely due to just boot damage. And that is once on my own vehicle, I actually lost the backing plate to my rotor. So the part that sort of like protects and separates my axle from the back of my brake system, my brake rotor. And I had the outer boot explode and it put grease all on the back of my brake rotor, so it became very difficult to stop because my brakes were slippery. In that case, I went ahead and I actually replaced the boot because my labor is free for myself, right? Although, what's my time worth? I don't know, maybe like a DIYer might even still want to replace the whole axle. It's all what your time is worth. Is mechanicking fun for you? What's your return on investment there? Yes, that was one situation where I did replace my boot prematurely without the axle having any sort of issue. And then another example would be if you are losing grease from your CV joint and it is getting onto your exhaust system and then you're breathing it. I mean, obviously, of course, the anything getting on the hot exhaust system is dangerous because, if it's potentially flammable. However, grease is not like, axle grease isn't like super, super, super flammable compared to like, other liquids that can get on your exhaust. But what I'm more concerned about is like, if you are then constantly like breathing in that like smell, Because a lot of times your intake for your cabin air is sort of in the same area. I mean, sometimes on some vehicles. So what's the cost of replacing your axle or your CV boot even prematurely compared to like you breathing in or your family or whoever else in the car with you, breathing in these toxic fumes. So those are some examples of when you might want to replace it, those two situations where you might want to replace it a little bit early. But yeah, I would say save your money, wait till your axle is bad, and then just replace the whole thing and don't really worry about the boots. So I hope that answered your question. Now, if anyone else watching this is thinking, oh my gosh, I have a question for Faye, fantastic. You can, tools. You can, I was gonna say leave me a message on Facebook, but I actually turned my messages off because I started getting hate mail from men about my women's only classes. Sorry guys. And I also turned off my ability for other people to make posts on my Facebook page for sort of the same reason. I was getting a bunch of sexual things on my page. Okay. So Terry actually just left a comment on a post that I had made, and I had just been lucky enough to see it. But probably a better way to get in touch with me to answer your question would be to write me an email at pistonsandpixiedust@gmail.com. And that's also posted on my website, or you can leave me a message on Instagram. I try to check those as often as possible. And that is at pistonsandpixiedust on Instagram. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope this helped some of y'all. Bye. Okay, one last thing before I end this video. I forgot I should probably say, for liability reasons, take everything that I say, of course, in this video with a proverbial grain of salt, because, of course, this is me giving advice without having ever seen this vehicle. And of course, I'm assuming that this boot issue is minor and that the whole boot isn't just gone and exposing the CV joint itself, which of course can be dangerous. And I also want to say I do not mean any harm to any technicians who think that it is an appropriate thing to do to replace the entire axle assembly as soon as a CV boot splits apart, just because it might not be what I would do depending on customer need and circumstances. You know, you might be thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I've had a split boot before and this mechanic that I trust just replaced the whole axle right away. You know, well, they are of course trying to do the best and safest thing for you and your family and whoever else rides in your vehicle. Because of course, once a CV boot is split open and it starts to seep grease away from that CV joint, obviously that grease serves a major purpose in keeping that joint and all the bearings inside healthy. So of course, once it starts to lose grease, it's on the road to like destruction eventually. But you know, and who knows how long that will take. I mean, I've had customers where like I'm monitoring the same split CV boot for like months and months and months and months and years, you know, or it could degrade much faster, just depending on the roads that you drive on, the style that you drive, whether it's an inner or an outer CV boot, and all sorts of things. So yes, obviously the best and smartest thing to do is take your vehicle to get assessed by a trained and certified technician, and just have them give advice on the safety of your CV axle, and whether or not that split boot is causing a dangerous situation, or if it's just losing a little grease, that's not that big of a deal. So yeah, with that being said, I will see you in my next video.